Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I have another video for you guys. This is on the mysterious death of Chuck Morgan. And I had not heard of this man before, but as soon as I read about his case, I knew I wanted to do a video on it. And as with all my videos, I mean no disrespect to the family of Chuck Morgan. I'm merely just compiling the information that I found on the internet. So, Chuck Morgan, his name is Charles Morgan, but he went by Chuck. He was a very normal man. He sold escrows, so he was a very successful businessman. He owned his own company, and he lived in Tucson. I tried to look up how to say it. I've always called it Tucson, Arizona, but I heard it's Tucson, so I hope I'm saying that right. Tucson, Arizona, with his wife and his 4 daughters. His wife's name is Ruth. He was very happily married and absolutely adored his daughters. He was a very kind and smart and funny man and just lived a very normal middle-class life. On March 22nd, 1977, Chuck went to work as usual. He went about his normal daily routine, and no one really thought anything of it until he didn't return home from work that night. His wife was immediately worried, but from what I could tell, she did not call the police or report him missing. It had been about 3 days, and on March 25th, at 2 a.m., Chuck came stumbling through their back door. Ruth said that he was wearing one handcuff on his wrist and a zip tie around his ankle, was missing a shoe, and was completely unable to speak. So she gave him a piece of paper and a pen, and he wrote down that he had been kidnapped and tortured, and his captors had painted some type of poison on his throat, and it would either drive him completely insane or kill him. So Ruth obviously wanted to call the police, call him an ambulance, get him some medical attention, catch the people who did this to him. But Chuck said absolutely not, that that would just put a target on his family's back, that they weren't supposed to know that he had come home. He asked if Ruth could take his car and move it down the block so that if they drove by, they wouldn't know that he had come home. So for the next few weeks, Ruth nursed her husband back to health. She didn't really ask him that many questions, just wanted him to get better. He slowly regained his voice, and once he did, he started mentioning things about his job. This wasn't his escrow job. He started saying that he had secretly been working for the federal government for several years, fighting organized crime in Arizona. He said that he worked for the Treasury and was a secret agent and could never tell Ruth about this job. Now, something I didn't know about Arizona in the 70s was that there was a lot of organized crime rings going on, and the federal or the state government of Arizona started cracking down on this organized crime around the time of Chuck Morgan's death. So once he regained his voice, he started going about his daily routine, but this time much more paranoid. He always wore a bulletproof vest and never allowed his daughters to go anywhere without him. He would drive them to and from school and to and from any appointments or practices or anything like that that they had. However, just a few months later, in May 1977, Chuck disappeared again. Ruth assumed that he would be back just like last time, but after several days had gone by, nothing ever turned up of him. 9 days after he disappeared in May, Ruth received a very strange phone call from an anonymous woman she had never heard of before. This woman said, "Ruthie, Chuck's all right. Ecclesiastes 12:1-8. So, Ecclesiastes is a book of the Old Testament of the Bible, and I will read this passage to you from the ESV version. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, and the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease before they are few, and those who look through the windows are dim, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets, before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel is broken at the cistern. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of all vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Okay, so that's the verse that the anonymous woman, or those are the verses that the anonymous woman told to Ruth on the phone. So they're kind of sad and pretty disturbing verses. Other versions are a little bit different and a little bit more spooky, but that's the general gist of the verses that Ruth was given. So 11 days after Chuck went missing and 2 days after Ruth received this mysterious phone call, Chuck's body was found in the desert about 40 miles west of Tucson. His body was laying outside his Mercury Cougar car. He was still wearing his bulletproof vest, but had been shot in the back of the head with his own .357 caliber Magnum revolver, which was also laying beside him. Inside the car, police found some sunglasses that were aviators, and they definitely were not Chuck's. They also found a cache of ammunition, several weapons, CB radios, and one of Chuck's teeth wrapped in a handkerchief. So this car, you couldn't open the trunk from the fender. You could only open it from the driver's side, and the car had been modified so you could open it from the outside. Also, police found a map to Chuck's body that was drawn by Chuck. They also found a $2 bill that was pinned to his underwear, and on the front were 7 Hispanic names. Let me read them to you. They're all from A to G. Acevedo, Bejarano, Cayero, Duarte, Encinas, Fuente, and Gradillas. So above that list of names was Ecclesiastes 12 with the 8 verses circled within the serial code of the dollar bill. On the back of the bill, the signers of the Declaration of Independence were numbered 1 to 7, and there was a map drawn from Tucson to Mexico. 2 days after Chuck's body was found, a woman who only called herself Green Eyes called into the police department and said that she had been with Chuck the night that he disappeared in a hotel room. She said that he had a briefcase full of money and was going to meet with a hitman who was paid to kill him. He was going to see if he could pay the hitman not to kill him, and was going to meet with him that night. She also claimed that she was the woman who called Ruth 9 days after Chuck went missing. Okay, so now we're going to get into some theories about Chuck's death. Before his disappearance, Chuck had alluded to his wife that he had sold some land escrows to a mafia family. Now, a lot of mafia members during this time would use land escrows to hide their money from the government. When Ruth asked for specifics, he just said that it was better that she knew as little as possible to keep her and their daughter safe. It was later found that he had duplicates of these illicit transactions that were going on in Southeast Asia. So maybe it was possible that he was killed to hide these paperwork. So Chuck was also supposedly one of the main witnesses called on in a fraud case against the head of a mafia crime family. One theory says that the mafia wanted their key witness to just disappear so that he couldn't say anything against them. So maybe the mafia family hired a hitman to kill Chuck, and when Chuck found out about this, he set up an appointment with the hitman out in the middle of the desert, and when he went to go meet with him and pay him off, the hitman took the money but killed Chuck anyways. This theory seems pretty plausible to me. I think maybe it makes sense, like that he made a map of where he was going to go. He had the money that the anonymous woman knew about and was going to pay off the hitman. He didn't want to tell his family where he was going, and so he just disappeared. He had done it once before, and maybe he got away the first time. And so they really wanted this hitman to get him this second time. They weren't going to have a lot of more chances. And so when Chuck told him that he had money, he took the money from both the mafia and Chuck and killed Chuck anyways. So this theory seems pretty plausible to me. It doesn't seem like much of a stretch. Another theory is that this was an inside job. So Chuck said that he was a federal agent, and maybe this was an inside job within the federal government. Maybe Chuck knew something that he wasn't supposed to. Maybe his identity hadn't gotten out. Maybe he was a double agent. Who knows, you know? So maybe he was killed for this. Maybe he wasn't supposed to tell his wife who he was working for, and once he did, they had to kill him to keep their identity a secret. Some theorists think that the $2 bill was a secret message to other agents about what was going on. This is kind of a little bit of a stretch for me to believe, but we really have no idea. Like, who knows? It could be anything. Okay, so another mafia theory is that Chuck was part of a money laundering scheme that went really wrong. So supposedly Chuck was working for the heads of a money laundering scheme, and the heads became a little bit worried when they found a file that was stored away as, quote, insurance paperwork. So they started getting a little bit worried about that some of their files weren't stored away properly, and the March kidnapping was to get information out of Chuck. So once they got the information that they needed, they let him go. But they found some more things that they were worried about and kidnapped him once again, but this time weren't going to let him get away and ended up killing him in the desert. That theory seems also pretty plausible because it ties in the March kidnapping, which raises a lot of questions for me, especially about the federal government, that it was an inside job theory. The March kidnapping just doesn't really fit in with that. The other mafia theory about how Chuck was a key witness, the March kidnapping kind of ties into it. Maybe he got away once and they definitely didn't want him to get away again. But why would Chuck tell his wife about the federal government thing in both of these scenarios with the mafia and the money laundering scheme. Like, why wouldn't he just tell her about the mafia coming after him or the money laundering scheme? Because at that point he really had nothing to lose. I guess to keep her safe, and maybe he really was under the influence of some type of drug, like he wasn't able to speak, so he kind of wasn't in his right mind, and that was the first thing that came to his head. Maybe he really didn't want her to know what was really going on to keep her safe. But I don't know. A lot of these things just raise a lot more questions than answers for me. So I don't, who knows? We're all just kind of guessing at this point. So the last theory is that this murder was tied to 2 other murders that happened in Arizona. So there is an investigative journalist named Don Devereaux, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He took a keen interest in Chuck's murder back when it happened. In 1990, Doug Johnston, a computer technician, was found murdered in a parking lot across the street from Don Devereaux's office. He looked like Don Devereaux and drove the same or a similar make and model vehicle as Don Devereaux and parked in the same parking lot that he did. So many people believe that Doug Johnston was murdered due to mistaken identity, that maybe the same people who murdered Chuck Morgan were coming after Don Devereaux and accidentally mistook Doug Johnston for him. Another investigative journalist named Danny Casolaro contacted Don Devereaux and had some questions for him about the Chuck Morgan case. He asked if Don Devereaux could send him some of the evidence that he knew of in the case. Before Don Devereaux was able to send the evidence to Danny, he was found dead. The circumstances surrounding Danny's death are still being investigated. It has officially been considered a suicide, but many people do not believe that this is the case. And also, sadly, Ruth died of cancer in 2006 without truly finding out what happened to her husband. Officially, Chuck Morgan's death has been ruled a suicide, but a lot of people like me are still not convinced that this was a suicide. Not only was he shot in the back of the head and was wearing a bulletproof vest, but also another person's aviator sunglasses were found in his car. There are also strange clues, including the $2 bill, the map found in his car, the just other strange things with the mafia and the land escrows, him already have been kidnapped once. There's just so many things that tie into this case that are just very strange that I'm just not fully convinced that this is a suicide. I'm not sure which theory I believe the most, but I would love to hear what you guys think about it. Let me know which theory you believe the most, or if you have a theory of your own, I'd love to hear about it. I'd also love any requests that you have, any cases you'd like me to look into. Just leave them down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, I just want to reiterate, no disrespect to Chuck Morgan or his family, and it just deeply saddens me whatever happened to him, and I hope that he gets the justice that he deserves. Thanks to you for watching this video, and don't forget to like it and subscribe. Thanks. See you next week.